Be trickling in as always, but I'm really excited for this year's lecture series. We're gonna do, let's see, 4, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll do 4 more. So we have some exciting ones. The first, we did put out the spring series list, and Sean and Kelsey are going to be starting us off with the Wyoming Toad project today. And then next month is going to be really, I think, exciting or interesting maybe. We're going to talk about the Shoreline Sanctuary, which is here on grounds that I don't think too many people know about. And I'm also going to be highlighting all of the green accomplishments we had this past year, which is an enormous amount of things that have happened in 1 year's time, which is, I think, really great to celebrate. And then in March, we are going to have Bridget talk about her Marine Mammal Center project in California. And then something really exciting is happening in April. Originally, I had it slated for Joni to talk about the Black Mamba project again, but we are going to have the founder and a black mamba here in April. So they will be giving our presentation in April. So that's really exciting. I'm not going to talk anymore right now. I'm going to let Sean talk your ear off. And he has said this is going to be the best one of the entire series. Oh, sorry, not just the series, ever. So we'll see about that.
Starting off, I'm not sure if my mic's working now.
Is it on mute?
It'll be the best ever in a second. Okay. All right. So it's a little hard to follow up last month's session on elephants. Carrie did such a wonderful job. But don't you worry, just because we're talking about little tiny stuff doesn't mean that this can't be a big presentation. So we're going to split this into 2. I'm going to talk more about the history of the program, why we got into it, and our trips out to Laramie, Wyoming. And then we're going to have a short video, U.S. Fish and Wildlife video in the middle, and then Kelsey's going to finish up talking about all the stuff that they do husbandry-wise and the improvements that have been made, and hopefully we'll be sending thousands and thousands of tadpoles back up to Wyoming over the next decade and more. So, as you can see, we're going to talk about everything and anything you wanted to know about Wyoming toads. But first, it's important for you to know why we even got involved in this. Back in 2008, the zoo, actually AZA, wanted to do something about amphibian conservation because there were multiple frogs and amphibians across the globe that were having problems as far as their populations go. We were seeing them plummet for various reasons. Some of it was human encroachment, some of it was because of disease, some of it was because of pesticides, some of it was because of all the above. But the zoo decided, and you have to remember back then, we didn't have a lot of money, but we wanted to put something into it. So that's why we have a small amphibian exhibit up at the Discovery Barn. That was the beginning of it. But we also wanted to really be involved with the program that was doing conservation work out there, as well as showing everybody amphibians here that came on grounds, but also being involved with those conservation efforts. And it just so happened that the Wyoming Toad SSP was looking for groups that were interested in joining the SSP. So we joined back in 2008, and now it's been 11 years that we've been going back up there. So it's a great group of people, and I'm going to talk to you about what we do there. It's not, I think a lot of people see us getting in the van, going away for a week, and thinking we're having a great old time. And it is a good time, but it's a lot of work too. So just to give you, do I have a pointer on this, Stacia?
Yes. There you go. Yep.
There it is. So you can see where the Wyoming toad's original range was. They were, at one point in time in the 50s and 60s, you could have gone to Laramie, and the Wyoming toad was the most abundant vertebrate found there. And now, you're lucky if you see one. So this is their natural range. Unfortunately, by the 80s, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife declared the fact that the numbers are so low, we're going to put them on the endangered species list. And then by the 90s, they pulled whatever toads they could find into captivity because they're afraid that they were going to go extinct. And in fact, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has declared them extinct in the wild. So if you go on their webpage, it says the toads are extinct. Even though there are some populations out there, chances of them being able to survive on their own is slim to none right now without a little help from us and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. In 1996, the SSP was formed by a few zoos, so they were developing ways that they could work with these animals, try to breed them, see what the best scenarios were to keep them alive and breeding, and hopefully put some tadpoles and toads back in the wild. So where we are today, there's more than 190,000 animals have been released back into the wild, 7 zoos, approximately 500 toads. That varies by 100, give or take, each year in captivity. For those of you who don't know, Kelly Martin on our education staff is our education liaison to the SSP. I'm the vice coordinator, and we've had several people from the zoo over the years join us on these trips out there, including Kelsey the last 2 years now. And last year was the first time, some of you might recognize the fact that we do have these on exhibit right now. It used to be they were only in biosecure rooms behind the scenes so nobody could see them. So what we've done is taken some of that population out, and they'll never go back in with the rest of the population, just to have them on exhibit for people to learn about. So every year, usually later July, this was the first year we actually went in August, but in that time we make that trek out to Laramie for our U.S. Fish and Wildlife meetings and our SSP meetings. It starts in Kansas City. Most of the time we go right up 29 and then 80 the whole way over to Laramie right here. One year we had to take this route though because this was all flooded. Just a little background for you though. So there's a lot of this, plenty of that, and an occasional this on the way out. But the way out is a really important time too because it does give us the time to talk about things, whether it be just getting to know each other. Sometimes we picked up people from Omaha. Sometimes other zoos have met us into Omaha and we take this big caravan out. So it really is, even though it's a long 10 hours, it can be very eventful, and you prepare yourself as best you possibly can for the upcoming work that's going to be done. And how do you do that? A little stop by Runza. One of my favorite stops in the middle of Nebraska each year. Most of the time, it's a very safe trip out. We've never had problems except for one year. For those of you who have seen our Kia and wonder why it looks like a golf ball, that was because one year on our trip out, we had a giant hailstorm attack us just in between Cheyenne and Laramie. And this is what it looked like. So here we all are gathered as a group. You can see, I don't know, there's what, 15 people or so there in that picture. And we all squeeze ourselves into this probably 900 square foot cabin. The nice thing is, I always say for most SSPs, you're at another meeting somewhere and you're all staying in your individual rooms, and you don't get that sense almost like a family where you're all working together. Being in a cabin forces you all to work together and sleep together. Not really, just in the same room. As you can see, this is a big bunk bed area. In fact, there's a triple bunk up there. None of us have ever used a triple bunk. I think, Kelsey, you should try that next year. I think it could hurt, though, on the way down. But this is how we all squeeze in here. Very small little dining room area. This is usually by kids out on field trips in the summertime, but we utilize it for a week in July. And this is usually where we have our meeting. So very, as you can see, very formal SSP meeting. This is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife office in Laramie, and sometimes we do some meetings there. This is actually us getting ready to go out in the field, getting some instructions. Again, very formal. This is our U.S. Fish and Wildlife agent, Jason Palmer. And he's going over the directions of exactly how we should be doing our field work. Again, another picture of the field work. And this is the cabin just looking out. You can see in the background there, this is one of the lakes called Porter Lake. And this is one of the release sites. When we first started, there was only one release site, the last place where the Wyoming toads were ever seen in the wild. And this was actually the second one that was put on probably 2 or 3 years after we're in the program. Now there's 5 release sites, kind of the old adage of not keeping all of your eggs in one basket, spreading them out a little bit. Part of that's a great thing in that you are trying out different locations to see how they're doing, but by spreading them way far apart, you're also limiting their contact with each other too. So it could have a limiting factor as well. So here's another look at Porter Lake behind our Buford cabin. We do spend some time releasing tadpoles and toadlets when we first get there. This is our SSP coordinator, Val Horniak from the Toledo Zoo. You can see Jeff from Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. He's releasing that looks like a year, so 1-year-old toadlet. Those are some sweet pants, and I'm not sure why I wore those that year. I don't have those anymore, if that helps. But this is a group, we're releasing some tadpoles in the little marshland there, and here you can see the actual tadpoles as they're in the water going their own way. This is Mortenson Lake. If you want to put this on a scale, this lake and all the surrounding areas that we do our surveys is about the size of the zoo. So you're talking about 200 acres, which in the grand scheme of things, it's not very big when you're talking about an entire species. So our job when we're out there is usually to survey around that entire lake. And it doesn't seem like that big of a deal unless you realize the task at hand. We walk, probably about the size of this railing, and you have a partner, and each one of you walk down there, and then you take a couple steps to the right, and you walk back this way. And you just do that over and over. You have a allotted amount of time, and it changes from year to year exactly what U.S. Fish and Wildlife wants us to do, but it's very time consuming. There have been years where we've gone out there where we haven't found a single toad. Fortunately, recently we've been having much more luck in that avenue. So again, you can see another picture with the mountains in the background. Some years it's very rainy, so this is usually a grassy area. This is obviously a time where we had more rain, so you might be slugging along in there. Some people have been known to get stuck in there. Again, searching through some of the higher grasses, but most of the time the toads are found when we're looking for them much closer to the water. Maybe not in the water, but around the water, closer to the water. There you can see one that we found. You can see over on the left here, it's pretty marshy. That was a staged photo, so pretty background. But you can see they might be in grasses, they might be on this much more sandy area. Sometimes they might be in the shallow water. Sometimes they might be in a puddle. Sometimes they might be on a cow pie. And it's important for everybody to realize that the ranchers who are involved with this, even though it's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife program, there's ranching going on. So there's a relationship between the government and private landowners. And without that partnership, it wouldn't work. And if you had a scenario, prairie dogs are a really good example. People are very distrusting of the government when they start talking about wanting to use land for endangered species. That sets off a big light bulb in some of these folks' head because they don't want their land to be taken away. That's reasonable, in my opinion. So the government has spent a lot of time talking about and making sure and assuring the folks who live there that we're not taking your land. This is a combined effort, and slowly but surely there's been more landowners who have had interest in this, and people who live in the cities it's no longer taboo to talk about Wyoming toads. When we went out there, I remember in 2008 when we went out there for the first time, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife agent said, you know, maybe not mention the fact that you're here for the Wyoming toads, an endangered species. It's totally changed now. Here's Stacia. Once we catch a toad, there's lots of work to do. Kelsey obviously has her hands on one. We do a lot of recording. Stacia, you can see she has a GPS unit over here, so we record exactly where we caught them from. We record their weights and their height. We take pictures and make sure that each one of them has a unique wart pattern on their back. We talk about where they're found and what type of environment they're in, what the wind was, what the sun was. All that goes into the data. Taking a closer look at one of the toads. Here's Jeff and I, obviously very intrigued by something that's going on with that toad's belly. Stacia doing a chytrid swab. So I mentioned before about diseases being a problem. In Wyoming toads specifically, back in the 70s and 80s, they would go on to some of these lake shores, and there would be tens and hundreds of toads just dying on the shoreline, and all of them came up positive for chytrid. Was that the main factor in why they were dying off? Probably a combination of that and the fact that there was a large amount of pesticides used back in the 70s. But now it's not a matter of going back and saying, what was the problem? Now we need to say, how are we going to repopulate? More chytrid testing. A terrible picture of the toad, but this is the only one that I had in an actual petri dish, so you can see the size and the wart pattern. More chytrid testing. You never know how many toads you're going to get. This is a great picture because we are all finished up for the day. We're just going to do one more plot of land along this little gully. And it was 5 o'clock. Everybody was tired. Everybody wanted to go get something to eat. And Jeff, who's right here from Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, he's kind of like the toad whisperer. And I think we found 10 toads. And it takes about 15 minutes, you guys say, to process each toad. So we're almost 2 hours longer than we had to meet everybody else at dinner. They left us. So we also take the time to go out to either one of the other release sites or one of the other locations, U.S. Fish and Wildlife locations that breed and house toads out there. One's in Saratoga, which is up over the mountains. One's just outside of Laramie. This is Saratoga, and this is actually an old picture. I put an old picture and a new picture. They house the most toads of anybody. So each one of these little aquariums, I think they're 30s, houses anywhere from 2 to 15 toads. And here's their new setup, which Kelsey will probably hit on a little bit of this during her part of the talk, but these are all polycarbonate tubs and a little bit bigger, easier to clean, really neat light setup. So they've been advancing their technology as well. Here you can see just a pile of toads there. We also take the opportunity when we're going over the mountains to Saratoga to look at their facility. We stopped by, and I just thought I'd put a few photos in here about how beautiful it really is going from the high plains up into that mountainous area. This is the Snowy Mountains. Stacia posing for a picture. This water, it's hard to see here, but it's absolutely crystal clear. If this photo were to be moving, you can actually see trout in here. In fact, in the bottom right-hand corner, I think you can see a couple trout in the water. Another just picture. And then sometimes, if we're lucky enough, we get to see a moose when we're going up over the mountains too. If you can't see the moose, it's right here. And I put a couple of pictures in here because we talk about, this is a fun picture. Our U.S. Fish and Wildlife agent, Jason, is an excellent swing dancer. And he shows everybody that were there. I have not accepted yet. But he usually teaches everybody how to swing dance. the importance of this picture isn't about swing dancing. It's about creating that relationship, not only with Jason, but all of the folks that are in Laramie and the surrounding area, so that they get to know you. They know that you're not a threat. They know you're not going to take their land away. And like I said, we do have conversations with people who ask us now what we're doing there. They've embraced the toads so much that they've even created a beer named Wyoming Toad. That's it. So all this takes us 10 hours to drive out on Sunday, a couple days for SSP meetings, and then a couple days for Wyoming Toad surveys, and then it's time for us to say our goodbyes. Again, this is Val Horniak, SSP coordinator. We take our typical yearly pictures, give a yearly hug, and then it's back to this, and back to that. I forgot to put a cow on in there, so it doesn't do the full loop. So I wanted to wrap it up real quick on where do we go from here. Now the Wyoming Toad program is a part of just the other grant program. So every 3 years we decide, is this important enough to continue to do? Last time we decided it was. What are the things we're trying to look at doing? Well, we continue to fund the trips to Wyoming for the SSP meetings and the surveys. Some other things that we're trying to do, I've been talking about this for 3 years, being in charge of the website for the SSP. Val and Toledo seem to be moving on from the Wyoming Toad, so they're looking for a place to hold all the funds. That's supposed to be us. So that's probably coming. We send about $1,000 a year to support SSP programs, which has included water quality analysis, chips for the toads that are being released, things along those lines. And finally, just furthering our work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It really has been, I shouldn't always say fun, because sometimes it's frustrating when you're putting thousands and thousands of toads out in the wild and they don't necessarily all survive, but you hope at one point in time you're going to hit that point where they have sustainability. When that is, I don't know. All I can hope is that we continue to strive to get to that point. So at this point, we're going to move on. U.S. Fish and Wildlife created a video. Some of you have been to the bird show, have seen this at the pre-show, but this is the editor's cut, so it's better. So we're going to show it, and then Kelsey will take over the second half of the program. So thank you. There you are, passing the baton. Oh, you heard that? Good thing I didn't say anything bad.
The Wyoming toad is found only in the Laramie Plains of Wyoming. It's found nowhere else in the world. And it has the maybe unfortunate distinction of being one of the most endangered amphibians in North America and the most endangered amphibian in the United States.
We thought these guys were extinct, and we were really fortunate to find another wild population.
We recognized the need, not just with Wyoming toads, but the amphibian populations worldwide are in crisis mode.
And the development of the Species Survival Plan came into being in a partnership effort so that we could reintroduce it into their natural habitat and let them go.
And so there is a lot of effort that we're putting into keeping this toad on the landscape because it declined so far so fast right before our eyes.
It's been a complicated process that has evolved and changed over the years.
It's been a lot of learning curve, a lot of learning curve.
There certainly are some ups and downs. One day you feel really good, and the next day, maybe not so good.
We've been doing a lot of scientific research to try and determine what habitat they need, trying to improve the diet of the captive breeding individuals.
Because it declined before we really knew much about it, what it needed, trying to understand what was needed for recovery is limiting.
You have to adapt. You have to be flexible. You have to learn to change your strategies.
One of our main objectives, of course, is to prepare them for being in the wild. Our 900 toadlets, for one feeding per day, would go through 27,000 crickets per week, and we feed them usually twice a day, most every day. Giving them as much possible diversity of food is good for several reasons. For one, it develops a bigger search image, so basically anything that moves they'll try to eat, versus only if it looks like a cricket they'll try to eat it.
It is quite an adventure to work with the Wyoming toad and to try to save it. The good thing is we're not alone.
Well, we found toads back in those big cottonwoods there, and we've let the willows come through here to form sort of a corridor, trying to figure out some of the variety that they can sample from and see where success is greatest, which is ideal. We've had this place for about 25 years now. As a private landowner, one always tends to be a little protective of the land. But it's neat if we can help establish the toad. It's not really a problem for us.
So we zero in, and there he is right now. Reintroductions are often misunderstood as far as a conservation technique. Many people think it's very easy to reintroduce an animal, that you simply take a captive bred animal, put it back out into the wild, and then it will thrive and flourish and reproduce. Oftentimes it's much more difficult than that. It's extremely complicated.
In 2010, there was one toad that we found in the wild twice that year. So we're pretty sure there was one wild toad. And then last year, I believe they found 200 in one survey.
There she goes. People don't understand, okay, the world is changing and the toad didn't cut it. And, why are we working so hard to save it? Part of the problem is that humans are changing the landscape. And I think that we have a responsibility to try and protect those that we harm through our activities. But also, biodiversity is important. It keeps us healthy. So we should have an invested interest in the animals around us.
Some people will look at a toad and they think, well, if it goes extinct, why should we care? But realistically, if you take that approach to things, where do you draw the line?
Extinction is final, and we put a lot of effort into making sure that that doesn't happen with the Wyoming toad.
The Wyoming Toad Recovery Program gives a great example of a truly collaborative, partnership-based group of individuals.
Without all of the representatives from each of the institutions reporting about what's going on, we wouldn't make this work.
We all want the same thing. We want self-sustaining breeding populations of the Wyoming toad in its natural environment on the ground in perpetuity.
Hello everyone, my name's Kelsey. I've been on Team Australasia for about 5.5 years now, a little bit over that. And my grant involved expanding our Wyoming toad facility. So, thankfully this was actually a 2-year grant because I don't know how I would have done all of this in just 1 year, and it's still a work in progress. So phase 1 was breeding, and then phase 2 is working on our toad husbandry. So I wanted to have the ability to double our toad population. Historically in the past we've had anywhere from like 25 to 35 toads. We're already up to 41, and after I build a few more tanks, we can potentially get up to 60 or more. So you're welcome, Australasia. So I also wanted to really be able to produce more tadpoles. Even though we would breed toads every year, we wouldn't always get tadpoles, and that's just kind of how it is. Sometimes the toads wouldn't lay eggs. Sometimes the eggs would not be fertile. So I just wanted to have more pairs. So historically we would have 4 pairs. But now we have the ability to breed 8 pairs a year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our former facility. So this is in the Outback barn, and for those of you who don't know the barn layout, this is in a room called Outback 2. And this right here was our whole toad facility. So this is pod 1. That's where all of our adults were kept. And we would have shelves on either side, here and here. And then this was solely our breeding facility. So super small, super cramped, a little claustrophobic. It worked, but could have been better. So that is the plan of this grant. Our old tanks were also very sterile. They worked, but just kind of boring for the toads. So we just wanted to add some stuff that would make their lives more enriching and more natural. So you can see they were kept on just mats. And actually, we got away from the mats when I started, and it was just the plexi enclosures there. So this was also a dump and fill system. So we were just using city water and adding a dechlorinator. And it did work, but after a while, we kind of decided we needed to do something better. There's a little toad. I think that's a little girl. So this is our old breeding setup. So we would have a pair per tank. So we would have a pair breeding here. This level is raised up once they actually lay the eggs. When you put the toads in, you just barely want them to be able to touch so they can lay their eggs and not drown, which they can actually do. And this is a flow-through system, so all of this water would dump out down here. There's some rocks in there to kind of create a biological filter, but all in all, it was still pretty small. So now, this is kind of already tearing down our facility here. So pod 1 is now going to be a quarantine room. And then pod 2 just removed. So pretty much I took over all of Outback 2. So there's still plenty of room, in my opinion, for the other things in there. But anyways, that was probably my least favorite part of this grant, was just tearing things down. Also, another one of my least favorite things, I got to learn how to use a grinder, so that was slightly terrifying. But so what I'm doing is I'm cutting through the metal on this new shelf so I can make room for plumbing for the new tanks. And this is basically just kind of laying out the building materials before everything started. Thankfully, you can't see my poorly drawn chalk outline of the new room. Okay, so you can kind of see this is before I tore down pod 2, but this is the original room right here, so it's quite a bit bigger. This is our Hibernaculum right here. It's basically a really fancy refrigerator that we use to hibernate our toads. It controls humidity, temperature, and then it'll sound an alarm if something is not where it should be. Over here, we've got the walls starting to go up. Gail and Tony did that. If you guys haven't worked with Gail and Tony together, it's a lot of fun. They're hilarious. So there they are, building the walls. And then finally, they are putting up this is concrete board. So we kind of had to figure out what we wanted the walls to be made out of. We couldn't just go with straight drywall because we do a lot of hosing in there. Outback 2, you can see we've got some caging here. We've housed squirrels in there, tamarins, and turtles, and probably other things that I'm not even aware of right now. But we needed the ability to be able to clean in there without destroying the walls. So that's why we went with this. More construction. This is looking from the inside out. So this is actually our kitchen right here, and then this is the rest of Outback 2 that I saved for the rest of our use. There's Tony being bashful because I'm taking pictures of him. But so on top of the concrete board, this is shower board, and it's waterproof, so that's kind of protecting the walls even further. That's looking in. So this is like if you were standing at the kitchen looking in, that's one of the doors you could go inside. So our enrichments over there for the kangaroos and all the other animals in the barn. Okay, so these are our new breeding tanks. They're a lot bigger. I did have a picture of Mary sitting in one, but I couldn't find it. So there's a lot more room for tadpoles in it. We were breeding in those really, really small tanks, so I can't even imagine doing that again. The format kind of changed a little bit. This is kind of what I wanted to do at first, but then I realized couldn't block the fire exit. So ended up having 2 rows. I had to build these stands for them. The floors in there are slanted towards the drains, and like in most buildings. So I had to get these adjustable legs for the stands to get everything flat. And then up here, those are pulleys for lights. So you can raise and lower the lights as you need to work in the tanks. So for breeding, the toads do receive hormone injections just to kind of get them started. They do get a night to get the chance to breed without the injections. I've personally never seen it happen. It may have happened before, but usually the next day after the injections, you'll find eggs. Little toad. This is the new breeding setup. So right after they come out of the Hibernaculum, this is what they go into. So the plants are really important. They're fake plants, but that's just where they lay their eggs on, and then the rocks are just to kind of rest. So this is what you want to see. This is 2 examples, 2 different pairs. The one on the left, not so great. The eggs are all kind of clumped together. You can see a lot of gray in there. That's not a good sign. That's usually eggs are not fertile. This is what you want to see over here. So a nice like pearl string of black eggs. Those are all really good eggs. Another picture. They shouldn't be clumped and lying on the bottom of the tank. Ideally, you want them all strung about the plants. And this is just a closer view. You can kind of see there's a few eggs in there that aren't good, but most of them look pretty darn good. This is kind of a cool picture, so bad eggs there, but you can kind of see the elongation that happens right before they hatch out. So that's all very exciting to see. And this all happens in the span of just a few days, too. Tadpoles. So we had 4 tanks of this many tadpoles this year, so that was exciting. These ones are a little bit older. They're not totally newborn little tadpoles, but we did have a lot. So they're eating lettuce, spirulina, and then this is the waste all down here. So you have to kind of try to spot clean that every day. Gotten pretty good at it, but it is very tedious. And then shipping them out. So we actually broke our own record this year. We sent out over 2,000 tadpoles. I think in the past, we've maybe sent out a little over 1,000. So that was kind of exciting. This took, I think, at least 4 hours to pack up all of our tadpoles because we had to count every single one. So very, very tedious. So we will hopefully have more tadpoles this year, but we will be better prepared for it. These are some of our toadlets that we held back. So on the left, these guys are very young. They're about the size of your pinky nail, really, and they are only big enough to eat springtails at first, and then we slowly switch over to fruit flies of varying sizes. And then this one's a little bit older. You can start to see it doesn't look so slimy, and it's starting to get a lighter color to it. Okay, so these are our new setups. We actually switched to we call them toad condos. We switched to a toad condo system before the grant, so we're just expanding and adding more tanks. So you can kind of see right here, there's a little clear tube that attaches the 2 tanks together. So over here we have the eco earth and then some moss in there, and then over here is their water side. It is a flow-through system, so we have better water quality, and we did switch to RO last year, so it is better for these guys, and I think they will do very well in it. Just another view. I do also feed them on the dry side just to kind of try to keep them from ingesting their substrate. Just a larger view. So this is what I have done, and I'm basically going to make a mirror image of that on the other side. So, still to come, I'm hoping to add a bigger variety of feeder insects to our toad population. So the facilities in Wyoming will actually go out into the wild and take sweepings with a giant net and just feed their toads whatever they catch. Can't exactly do that here. So hopefully thinking about possibly trying silkworms, but we'll see. I do have to make a few adjustments to the tadpole tanks. They did work, but there's just a few things that I want to do to improve that and make it even more efficient. Like I said, still building some more toad tanks. And then finally, we will be having a webcam so people can go online and kind of watch and see what goes on in our facility. We might have the ability to point it at our tadpole tanks, so we'll see. Haven't figured out the logistics of that yet. And then finally, some thank yous. Big thank you to the maintenance department for basically constructing the room for me, letting me steal their tools, giving me advice on how to build certain things. Team Australasia for allowing me to work in there. Sean and Stacia for helping me out and ordering me things. Rick from Life Support. I am a really bad plumber, so he's definitely helped me out with trying to figure out what I'm doing. Discovery Zone and ZLD for letting me steal all of your bugs over the summer. We had a lot of mouths to feed, a lot more than I thought we would, so we definitely had to steal some bugs from you guys, so thank you. And just the Casey Zoo for giving me the opportunity to have this grant. Questions?
So Sean.
Are there other toads that live in that environment in Wyoming?
Yeah, there's actually a lot. I don't know the specific species, but we find a lot of different frogs. I've never seen another toad, but I know they're out there. There's actually a poster in our cabin that kind of lists all the different species. And then there's a lot of wildlife there. There's pronghorn everywhere. There's cattle, of course. And then there's a lot of pelicans, and you just hope that they're not snatching your toadlets up after you release them.
Pelicans and blue herons, a lot of times in the morning we'll be eating our breakfast and watching them dive down and grab something. And we're like,
hopefully not the toad. Any other questions? Yes.
That land, the introduction sites, is that private or BLM? BLM land, or, and then also, what's the best educated guess as to survivability?
I'll let Sean answer that. I'm pretty sure it's all private.
Give me the hard one.
That's right.
Survivability, I'll start with the back part, is probably not great. The numbers that they're seeing, overwintered animals is an important one to get, and then adults that might have survived more than a couple of years. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife has done a few things differently. I think to the positive, there's a lot of debate going on as far as should you do a hard release, should you do a soft release, and frankly, I kind of like doing a little bit of both. So you saw in some of my pictures and in the video there, they've had some corrals built out there, and they've put some tadpoles out there. They've put some toadlets out there to give them a little bit of a head start, so to speak. The numbers that they're getting back right now are showing some success with that, but it's too early to tell if how well it's working. And then what was your, the land. It's a combo, Tracy. There's some that's private land. There's some that is actually U.S. Fish and Wildlife land that is ranched on. And then there's actually some city land now too that the city's got on board with part of their wetlands. That's one of the newer places. And the gentleman that you saw with the beard, with the pipe, he actually has private land, but is a huge supporter of the program. And that's right across the street from Buford, the place that we stay at, and Porter Lake, which is the second release site. So it's a varied amount. There's another place that was just added last year that I haven't even seen yet. So we're getting more and more buy-in to this, which is a great thing. Right?
When you're looking at your surveys, you're only seeing surface level. So is there some correlation between the numbers you count and the actual perceived numbers of toads that maybe would not be visible?
I think there's actually a lot that we don't see
Yeah.
because we were using telemetry this past year on 2 different toads, and we knew just by the signal that they were there, but we spent like half an hour digging and we could not find it. So I think some of them are actually burrowed underground because the signal was moving right in front of us. Couldn't actually see the toads.
And they have to be doing that, Brian. There's some years, a couple of years in particular, where it was so dry out there that the Porter Lake was maybe a quarter of its size. I don't remember if you were out there that year, if you were out there, Kelsey. It was literally a quarter of its size. We didn't find a single toad that year. So the question for us was, are they just, going up after the winter, saying, "Oh, this is horrible," and going back down again and trying to make it just on their reserves? But I think more has to be done on the telemetry side of things. It's hard though, because you can't just outfit. You saw the little backpack that they created. You can't put a backpack on every toad that's out there. So you're just trying to gather as much information as you can from some of the subjects.
I mean, Wyoming's a gorgeous place, but it snows like 8 months out of the year, so they're definitely...
That's an interesting fact, because we're right below the snowy mountains there. So literally 9 months out of the year could have snow. They don't open up the passage to those mountains until like after Memorial Day. So it's open between Memorial Day and Labor Day because of the potential for not only a little snow, but deep snows. So we obviously do a very abbreviated hibernation here, where they're only in the hibernaculums for 6 weeks, six weeks-ish. In the wild, they might be underground for 9 months.
So they don't have like a ratio for every one toad you do see estimates X number in a hectare or something like that?
No. Nope, not yet.
Are you still finding positive chytrid results?
Yeah, that's an unfortunate. The question was, are we still finding positive chytrid results? And the answer is yes. In most of the toads that they find, the hope is that at some point in time you get the population high enough where some of them can actually recover. It's just like anything else. They'll have it, maybe slough it off and be able to recover from it. My philosophy is that these guys have hit such a low number of animals that no matter what type of outside, whether it be predation or drought or whatever harms their population, they just can't recover. Those low points on the bounce back just get too low and they can't recover from it. They are doing some studies though, going to the chytrid thing about inoculation and trying to work on it that way. The SSP helped to support a study at San Francisco that they were trying to see if you inoculated toads against the chytrid virus, would it work? And they're still waiting to see if the results are able to be worked in. Nobody else? Oh, Tracy.
Pesticide use on these lands, and do you ever release adults?
We do not release adults, we just release tadpoles. Some other facilities will release some younger toadlets. I think, does Red Buttes release adults?
Yeah.
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 So there's one fisheries and wildlife facility that does release adults as well, but I think they've had variable success there. As far as pesticides, I believe that the landowners, I don't think that they use pesticides. It's mostly for cattle, grazing cattle. They will every now and then have controlled burns, and I think actually it's been shown that the cattle's presence there actually helps the toad populations a little bit. And then I think there's a new site that does have some pesticide use further upstream. So we will see in the future how that affects the population, but it's a very new site, so we're not exactly sure yet.
There are a couple of things kind of going back to what Brian was asking about, but hitting on what you just asked about too, Tracy. There have been 2 programs, one at Cheyenne Mountain Zoo and then one at Saratoga, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Facility, where they would raise toads up for a year and then do a release after they have, a little bit more in their systems. And again, you can make the argument either way of, is it more important to get them out into the natural environment so that they can get used to being out there, because maybe babying them by keeping them inside for an entire year might go against it? So the jury's still out on that.
We also are not equipped to feed that many mouths.
Yeah,
we do not want to keep our tadpoles that long. Me personally, at least. In Australasia.
Okay, well, I was personally involved with this, so I know that Sean and Kelsey haven't let on what tremendous work it takes. I mean, you saw those pictures of the eggs, and Kelsey failed to mention that we have to count those and report those, and they're all tangled in those plants. So it's a very difficult job, and the amphibians are very difficult to care for and raise, and they're very sensitive. So this is a huge project for the zoo. It is one of our longest conservation projects where we've been totally involved from the beginning.
Totally.
We have totally been involved. In the zoo and out in the wild, it's been a neat project. But I think it's a perfect example to show, like Sean said, we got involved almost 11 years ago, and it had started a little before we were involved. And it's taken this long to have the successes it's had. You saw it on the video, but it is a huge learning curve. We had an RO system in the beginning, and then the group thought it was better to remove it. Now we're back to an RO system, so it definitely changes all the time, and we just have to accept that as part of conservation and make sure that we are ready for some failures and a lot of successes and learning along the way. So thank you guys for presenting that, and thank you guys for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again next month and in April and May as well. March and April. Thanks.